Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here, and I'm back with another video for Spellbinders. Today we're going to be using a couple of different products. These are all from the same designer series from Stephanie Lowe called Cool Vibes. We are using the Medium Peony, the Moonflower, and the Cosmic Feathers, and then for the sentiment I'm using Phrase Set 1. So here I have my Misty. These are cling stamps, so I have the foam insert that's already pulled out. These have the foam built into them, so you don't need it. I'm stamping in Copic Safe ink. My preferred is Intense Black ink from Simon Says Stamp, but you can use any Copic Safe ink. And I'm going to stamp this down on Nina 80-pound Solar White cardstock. So the first time that I stamped this, I thought maybe I just hadn't applied enough pressure. Nope, turns out that I just didn't get ink on the one corner of the stamp. Ink is in fact required to stamp an image. Imagine that. So now I'm just stamping that again after I've re-inked it, and I actually got up out of my chair to make sure that I was going to get good pressure. And then before we get into the coloring, I just wanted to show you on the back of all of these images, Spellbinders does something really cool, which is they've given you an example and you can also see how they were colored, which I love because especially with the Medium Peony, it's kind of got the flower, and then it's got like a partial medallion and some leaves. It's a really, really beautiful image. I super love it. But sometimes that can be a little bit confusing when there's a lot going on, and having that example there is awesome to just kind of see where to lay down your color. And I just, I really like any kind of example like that. In a lot of you can just go to the website and look as well if, you know, for any stamp set that you might own that you want to try, or Google it. That a lot of times it'll bring up examples that way. So if there's ever any question about what it is that you're coloring, like what should be where, try doing that. So we're getting into the Copic coloring here. I am adding all of my shading with my lightest color first. I like to start with my lightest color, work out to my darkest, darkest back into my lightest. That's just what works for me. And then on just the outside petals, which are the largest ones, I'm also going to add shading in from the edges, which is going to give me a highlight kind of across the center of those petals, and it's going to look like it's really kind of blooming out. So from my lightest color moving to the next darkest color, and really with my lightest color when I go in the first time, I'm just kind of what I call mapping, like where I'm going to put the color. I'm not completely covering up all the white, and when I go in with my next color, I'm not completely covering up the color that I put down previous to that. I'm just going in and putting it down. Here there's so many, with a peony, it's just a multiple petaled flower. There's a lot of movement going on, and like I said when I started, I think it's a really beautiful flower. So as I'm going, I'm using just the tip of my marker and really light flicking motions, and you'll see me turn my page. If you watch my channel, you've definitely heard me say before, don't be afraid to turn your paper. When you're doing the flicking motions and you're coloring objects, especially flowers, you want to make sure that you're going with the shape of whatever it is that you're coloring. So if your petal, like this one's coming down and off to the left, then you want your flicking to be going in the same direction. If it doesn't go in the same direction, it's going to look a little bit funny because, you know, it wouldn't have straight line coloring if the lines that are drawn in the stamp are going down and to the left. So the other thing that I'm doing on the outside edges, I'm kind of picking parts. Now the way that this is drawn already has kind of divots in it, and all I'm doing with the darker colors is I am kind of extending those and accentuating them. So I am just drawing almost little like triangles to where those little divots are. The inside petals, I'm really just adding little lines. I'm not doing very much flicking at all because I want to conserve the highlight on the edges. There are going to be naturally, as you color, some petals are going to be darker than others. They would be in nature. Don't sweat it, don't worry about it, but there should be a highlight on each one of those. So you might have more dark colors, but there should be at least a little bit of an area that's going to have your highlight color. This is going to give you separation in your flower so it doesn't look kind of like blobby, I guess, so that each petal has definition, and it doesn't get lost in there. So you might notice with my color combination that I've picked here, I'm going all the way out to an E99. That is maybe a little bit dark. I like my yellows to look golden. If you watched my last video, you know with the bee, that's just the yellow I tend to lean toward. But you could go with some darker oranges. You could go even all the way out to kind of a red with a yellow highlight. It just depends on the look that you're going for. For me, I just prefer just that gold kind of look, and using a YR24 and an E99 helps me to get that look. Here you could see sometimes I'm having to go back in with my darker color, and that's just because there's a lot going on in here, and there were some petals that I, had missed, and that's totally normal. And as long as you haven't mailed it away, it's never too late to change it, and you are going to see that in, the most sincere form in this video. Most of the time, if my videos are longer, you definitely know this if you watch my channel. If they're longer, it means something has gone awry. And nothing necessarily went awry, but I did make some changes. So we'll get there when we get there. So now I'm out to the lightest color. I'm not completely filling everything in. I'm still using the same kind of flicking motions, and I'm leaving some white areas in those petals. To fill in the center, I'm using that same YR24, and then I'm using the 99 to just go around the edges. That still wasn't dark enough for me, so I'm going to bring in an E57 to do the same thing, and then blend that all back out down to the YR24 again. I'm going to move on to the leaves here now. I love the way that she illustrates. I just think that these are such beautiful images, and she draws like these striations, these lines in all of her petals and into the leaves, and I really love that look. I think it's super pretty. So here I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the flower petals, but I am only coming out from the center of the leaf. So as I go through from my lightest out to my darkest, I'm making sure that I am leaving the edges of the leaves that are sitting on top of other leaves lighter. So if it's a petal that's underneath, you want it to be a little bit darker. That's going to push it into the background. And in order to, again, we're trying to create that, that separation to have that dimensional look. You want to make sure that the edges of the leaf that's on top is just a little bit lighter. Also, for this particular petal on the right hand side there, it is kind of curled up. Anytime something curls over itself, you could see it in the flower petals as well, it's going to cast a shadow on itself. So it's going to kind of change where the highlight sits. Just, they're called cast shadows. That's I guess the term for it. But just make sure that you're putting something darker on those edges. You don't have to bring it very far out. You don't have to make your whole leaf completely dark, but even just adding a line of your darkest color, which is pretty much all I'm doing here, is going to help lift up the part that is curled so that it is much lighter. With that direct dark contrast, it will help to give you that dimension. So here, just, working back out to the lightest color, blending everything out using those fine flicking motions. And again, just being kind of careful to leave those lighter edges so that everything is just kind of separated. I think a lot of times people are afraid of darker colors. Don't be afraid of your darker colors. Even if you just put a line of it in, even just try just a line of it, because I promise you will see such a difference in the dimension of your coloring. You don't have to get crazy, even if you just do the cast shadows, so where one item sits on top of each other. Even if you just make those shadows just a little bit darker, I think that you'll be really impressed with the difference that you see in your coloring in general and the dimension that you can achieve. So after I did this, I have been, and maybe you can tell from my voice, I don't know, I have been sick all week long. So I was actually coloring this in increments. So I would rest for a very long period. There was like 2 days I couldn't even get out of bed. But I would rest for a very long period of time, and then I would have like maybe 20 minutes of energy, and I would sit at my desk and color, and then I would have to go nap again. That's just what my week was. I'm actually pretty impressed with how fluid this looks, that I was able to get like the camera pretty much the same exact way every time. But anyway, so we're moving on to the medallion here, and I wanted there to be a little bit more of that greenery kind of on the left-hand side. There is the one leaf on the right, but I wanted to include it on the left as well, and I'm just basically coloring this portion of it as if it's just one solid piece. The only place that I'm really adding the shading any extra is kind of around the there's two like circles that are drawn, and I did shade to the left and right of that. But other than that, I treated those 3 pieces that I colored basically as one piece. Then I'm going to move on to the violets. Yellow and purple are complementary colors on the color wheel, which means they sit across from each other. So green and red are complementary colors, yellow and purple, blue and orange, pink and green. So those are colors when you're going into a card that you know they're already going to be pretty together. So I knew that I was going to use that violet with those feathers that I had going on. I thought that they would be really pretty with like a teal color, and I knew I liked teal and purple together. So just to kind of, I guess, discuss a little bit about my color choices, there's a lot of times people ask questions about that, like how do I select my colors? That's it. So I start with one that I know that I'm gonna, like one combo I know will work, yellow and purple. And then I start to bring in other colors that I know I like with those. So purple is a close enough friend to pink that it also looks good with kind of that yellow green. And the same thing with teal. So the purple is close enough to that bluish, well, blue, and then it's a bluish green, so it's just kind of a play on that. Again, I'm just kind of coloring in the medallion as if they are pretty much just one piece outside of the really delicate pieces that are drawn on the end. Those I kind of shaded to the left and right of just so that they would have a little bit of dimension. And then if you don't feel comfortable coloring things that tiny with like just using the tip of your marker, or you get some bleeding, which I definitely did. I had to go back in with my colorless blender. Don't sweat that stuff. That happens to everybody. Only do it once. If you're very nervous about doing something that small, like I said, I always start with my lightest out to my darkest, darkest back into my lightest, but you do not have to do it that way. You can start with your darkest and then go through to your lightest and still get results that you'll really be happy with. Here I'm just going to show you the color combination that I used. I will be coloring the feathers with this, so you will see it again, but I'm not going to force you to watch it again. You've already watched it twice. The one thing that I did want to note on the rose, I colored it the same way with the same colors with the yellows. For the leaves, I did switch it up just a teeny tiny bit. Instead of using a YG17 and a YG67, for my 2 end colors, I used a G05 and a G17. Those are a little bit more blue based. And I wanted there to be just a little bit of differentiation because they are a different leaf than the peony leaves, so I didn't want them to be exactly the same. I wanted there to be some difference, but I didn't want them to be competing with each other because there's already a lot going on in this little arrangement we've got going on. So I just thought adding just a little bit of a blue would, well, a blue-green would be just enough to kind of set them apart from each other. And they are also just slightly darker than the peony leaves. So once I had that done, then we're going to move on to the feathers. And here's where that blue-green comes back in again. I'm just filling it. Basically, I'm going to fill in the whole, what do they call that? Is it a stem of the feather? I don't know what they call that. I'm sure that there's a technical term for it. I don't know what it is. But I'm going to fill in that whole center line, and then I'm going to use the same flicking motion out toward the edge of the feathers. Now these are drawn super cool. So there's like flowers and leaves in there, and on one of them there's like some crystals. I'm just using the blue-green on the actual part that is drawn like feathers. So that's what I'm coloring in with this color combination, and then I'm going to again add in the darkest color and then work my way back out to the lightest. I'm going to use this color combination for all 3 of the feathers. I just really love that, the blue, green, and the purple together. I think that they're really pretty, or blue, green, and the yellow, green I love. So here, basically, I just went in with the leaves and the flowers, colored them exactly the same. And then I wanted to just quickly touch on the crystals part of it, because I know this isn't something, I guess, maybe that everybody would have seen before. So with crystals, they're multifaceted. So on one side is going to be catching more light than the other. So basically I just picked the colors. I had 4 colors, and I just colored in different segments. I didn't really do too much shading. On the yellow ones, I did add a little bit of shading where they join to the feather, but other than that, I just filled them in. Just filled them in with varying colors. I'm going to go in and use my white gel pen to just add some details. This is something that is super fun and can really kind of make a design your own. It doesn't even have to make sense. Like in this particular one on the peony, I ended up doing like little white dots down the center of the leaves. I've never seen a leaf like that in nature, but I don't much care because I think that it looks super cool on the card. I did go add some that made sense. Like I added white highlights to the berries on the feather. I also added white highlights to the edges of the petals on my flowers. Here, I like to outline all of my images. You certainly don't have to, but it's something that I like to do. And there's 2 different line weights in here. And what that means is one is thicker than the other. So I'm actually using 2 different pens to do my outlining. You could, go with one or the other, but I kind of wanted to stay true to the way that she drew it. So I taped my dies in place, went ahead and ran that through the platinum die cutting machine, and now I'm just peeling off my washi tape that was kind of holding them in place. Once I had them all done, I also went back and ran through the thanks die from the phrase set 1, and I just cut this out of black cardstock since I had done all of my stamping in black and made sure that outline was bold. I wanted to make sure I tied in that black. I'm going to go ahead and work on the background now. I'm using just regular Distress ink on Nina Solar white cardstock. I've been working on the 80 pound. I think I probably forgot to say that. But I'm starting off with Cracked Pistachio. I kind of want this to fade down and to the right. I knew I wanted the majority of my design to be kind of in the top left. So once I have the Cracked Pistachio down, I'm going to add in some peacock feathers, and I'm not completely covering up that Cracked Pistachio. I'm just, kind of letting it fade off that bottom right-hand side. And then the darkest color is going to be Mermaid Lagoon, which is just really going to be concentrated mainly in the top right. I'm sure you've probably seen this song and dance before. I'm going to sprinkle on some clean, clear water just to add some interest to the background, get those water droplets moving. And then after I was happy with those, I'm going to grab my Perfect Pearls in the color Perfect Pearls and put some of that down on my craft mat. The way that these adhere is with water, so that's how I'm adding it. That's how I almost add it every time, honestly. So I'm going to mix that into a nice little shimmery, shiny puddle, and then I'm going to flick that onto my card base as well. I'm not working on watercolor paper, so you want to be careful with how much water you add, but honestly, I've never had really a problem with adding the water to it, or at least the minimum amount that I typically add. So I kind of laid out my card the way I wanted it to be, and now I am just going back in with Tombow Mono multi-glue. I'm going to adhere 3 of the feathers and the rose down flat, and then I'm going to pop up the last feather and my peony so that there is some dimension to the card. So just going through and adding that down. Here's where I guess part of the struggle started to come in for me is building the arrangement. So I'm popping those up. Like I said, I'm using just Scotch foam adhesive, and I typically make 1-layer cards, which means I do a lot of masking, and I like building dimension without there actually being dimension. Here I'm going to add this peony on top, but I've already put that feather down with the Scotch foam tape. So I need to kind of mark off the area where I don't need any foam, and I'm just going to do that by putting glue in that corner. I'm going to cover everything else in the foam tape and then adhere that down. So everything, so the one feather that is raised and the top flower will sit flush with each other. I'm going to add the thanks again with the same Tombow Mono Multi Glue. And it did take me a little bit to kind of decide where I wanted that to be. So I'm just kind of setting it down, you know, checking out whether or not I like that. I did end up moving it down just a little bit there because I liked that better. And then one of the last things that I did was just add some clear droplets with some glossy accents. I like using glossy accents for this because it's clear and you can see through it. So I thought I was done. And then, yeah, I completely disassembled it. Why did I completely disassemble it? Because it didn't feel like one complete piece to me. It felt like I had this arrangement, but everything was kind of separated from each other, and I felt like it was because of the white border. Now, that's not to say the white border is bad. It isn't. Everybody has their own looks that they like. This was just something that was kind of a struggle for me. So I was able to, even though I ripped it apart, and you can see, I totally ripped it apart. I was able to save everything but the rose. I had to recolor the rose again, and it was a small price to pay. I redid the background. Took me approximately, I don't know, 3 minutes. And now I'm going to kind of do it the way I had envisioned it in my head. So I'm going to stamp down all of my stamps. I'm not doing any masking because it isn't necessary. I'm going to be gluing all the pieces parts on. And I have fussy cut them out. That's what you saw me doing, you know, trimming off that white border. And again, it's not one way or the other isn't good or bad. It's just a personal preference. And for me, my personal preference was to have them look like they were one cohesive arrangement. And I didn't feel like the other look gave me that. So here, even though I fussy cut them out, there were some areas that were too tiny for me to get into. I'm just going to fill that in with a BG45 because it's the same color as my background, and I'm not going to worry about it. So just, you know, whatever it is in card making, ultimately at the end of the day, it's your card. So do whatever it is that you feel like works for you. I'm not using any more foam tape than I did before. Most of the time I was able to take it off the back of the card. So I'm just adding Tombow Mono Multi Glue to the Scotch foam tape that's already there because glue is glue. It will adhere it down. It doesn't need to be the adhesive that necessarily came on the foam tape. So once I had that down, I was much happier with the way that looked just for me. The only other thing that I really did differently was I felt like the sentiment was a little flat for me. So I cut a bunch of them out of white cardstock, and then I'm going to glue them together to give them some bulk, and I'm going to put that black one right on top of it, and then that way it's kind of lifted up just like the flower and the feather are. And I just felt like it gave it a little bit more presence on the card. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down. Once I have that down, then the only other thing I did was add the same clear droplets that I used before, popped them off with my fingernail, and then I'm going to show you both of them. So the one on the left is the one that has the white outline. The one on the right does not. They're both very pretty. They're both, you know, pretty much the same look. So just feel free to check it out and see which one's going to work for you. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.